Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. I appreciate it. I'm Anna Gremling, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization Executive Director. I did want to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the MPO and why we are, do we have a mic?
Yeah.
Oh, fancy that.
Just turn it on.
That's even better. Good, thank you. So essentially, the Indianapolis MPO was founded in transportation, but we currently, are here today to talk about environmental topics. So while we were founded in transportation, we are branching out into other areas, land use and housing being a couple of them. And of course, we have a resiliency snapshot going on currently. And environmental work as the federal government continues to push that at the forefront of some of their national efforts. The IMPO has 4 pillars: convene, inform, plan, and fund. Convene conversations. That's what we're here today to do. Also, I'd argue we are also informing conversations. We have a guest speaker that's going to tell us about some of the things that are happening in other parts of the country. We also like to plan because we are planning nerds. And so Annie is our project manager of our resiliency snapshot that is currently underway. And the intent of that, is to create a plan to try to bring more money back here to central Indiana. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Jurado, the Chief Resilience Officer and Deputy Director of Broward County. Dr. Jurado is responsible for leading climate resilience and environmental planning initiatives for Broward County, Florida. Areas of particular focus include sea level rise adaptation, sustainable water resource management, shoreline protection, coastal resource conservation, and clean energy projects. She works exclusively with internal and regional stakeholders to advance countywide resiliency planning informed by future conditions, scenarios including resilient infrastructure, design standards, and redevelopment strategies, and fosters public-private partnerships key to large-scale initiatives. Current priorities involve the application of climate information and economic risk assessments to inform basin-level countywide resilience plans. That's a lot. She's been a participant in the 4-county Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact since its formation in 2009. She serves on the board of directors for the American Society of Adaptation Professionals and the American Geophysical Union's Thriving Earth Exchange. She earned her PhD from the University of Miami in marine biology and fisheries. With that, I'm going to turn it over.
Hey, thank you. Oh, your mic. Let's see how we're doing. Thank you. Is this mic working all right? Yeah? Okay, great. Very much appreciate the invitation. Hope I can hold everyone's attention for a little bit. I think that probably the most interesting part of the conversation will come with the Q&A, because it sounds like there's a lot going on in the region. And I guess I was asked to just provide an example of the experience that we've had in Southeast Florida working as a region, in our case on climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. So I know that there's a lot going on in this particular region, probably in areas in which we've not been focused. So what I'll be talking about, as I said, is the mitigation adaptation effort, and provide some background as to how we got there, who's involved, how it works, what we've been able to achieve, and kind of how that's going and where we see things moving in the future. There's a lot that is probably happening at scales that I won't be able to cover in the presentation, but I hope comes out in the Q&A, and I welcome any follow-up either after the discussion today or offline when I get back home. But I'll begin with Southeast Florida, so I know I don't need to orient to Florida, but Southeast Florida, I'm in Broward County. To our south is Miami-Dade, which I'm sure you're well familiar with, Palm Beach to the north, and then we have Monroe County, which is the Florida Keys. Broward County, we have about 1.9 million residents. We have a little over maybe 6.9 through the 4-county area. Together we account for about a third of the state's population. a third of the state's GDP. And we share a lot in the way of similarities, whether it be our geology, our transportation systems, our economies. We're pretty well built out. Broward County is totally built out. We have no area for retreat. We have common resources, our beaches, our coral reefs, the Everglades. So we're very similar, and if you were to drive through the area, you probably wouldn't appreciate how you shift from one county to the next. It's pretty constant, the development. But what was happening, we all were working as 4 independent counties on issues of climate change, and most notably issues of sea level rise. Maybe we were working on different greenhouse gas emissions. Some of us were working on vulnerability assessments. We were all working with different experts, helping to inform our individual programs. We were all advocating, particularly at the federal level, for resources, trying to bring attention to the issues of the region. And our leaders found themselves together in the hallways in DC, and we were all sharing images, sharing graphics, and realized, you know, we're in this relatively small geographic area in the end, but we all have different projections, different ways of mapping things, and we're spending a lot more time trying to talk about how we're similar than telling the story about what the region needs, and because there was such disparity between the individual tools. It led to, at that time, Broward County Commissioner Kristen Jacobs, who said, you know, we stepped out in the hallway and she said, we really need to get our act together. And we're very powerful as a region, and we would do more if we were speaking with one voice. And so she tasked us as staff to head back, hold a regional summit, bring together everybody formally and talk about the shared challenges that we have as a region, opportunities for working together, how we've been working, and how we could plan moving forward. So we ended up being challenged with that task. We, at the staff level, had worked with our commissioners to talk about a deliverable from the event. We didn't want to just get together and convene and not have something come from it. And it led to the compact. So we had a regional conference, maybe only 300 individuals who were in attendance, but our leadership, one county commissioner from each of the counties, committed at that time that they would go back, put forward this document for a shared commission action, and that was nearly 15 years ago. So we formalized the compact in 2010. Some of the formal things that we agreed to were to baseline our science. That was one of the first kind of calls, was we can't all have different regional, different sea level rise projections. We should have the same projection, helping to inform the way we plan. Same tools for developing vulnerability assessments, emissions inventories, but we also agreed to get together and convene and hold regional summits annually where we'd be able to track progress and develop priorities. We agreed that we would partner on policy for climate and energy at both state and federal levels, and they agreed to assign staff to work to develop a regional climate action plan. And all that was undertaken at a time where resources were very lean. We were coming out of a recession, so it was just the existing staff who were sitting there and tasked with these challenges. It's important to note that it was voluntary by all of the commissions. There were no obligations. There was no change in governance structure. It was just a commitment to work together. And so I kind of highlighted here the primary objectives. Baselining the science was a key goal. On unifying the region, we were spending a lot of time trying to recruit the same experts to support our individual conversations. And part of the idea was, we're going to be able to attract a lot more in the way of resources if we can say that one investment here is benefiting the 109 cities that we have throughout the region and our entire population, rather than having to come down and try and say, for example, attract NOAA to come in and support our individual communities. And if they can count on the fact that they're going to come in and they'll be able to deliver the scale of impact, we'll have a better chance of attracting the resources and the experts that we need to help support our initiatives. And in large part, we were already, in some instances, already calling upon the same individuals, but ending up with different work products like the sea level rise projection. So again, it was trying to unify all of those activities. And then we also knew that The compact itself, our regional activities, were intended to serve kind of as an umbrella or the nesting of efforts, that it wasn't intended to supplant what happens at the county level. It wasn't intended to supplant anything that happens at the municipal levels, but seeking to assure the alignment. We knew that there was a lot of dependency between how we would respond as individual regions. While you might not be dealing with beach nourishment, but if we were to opt as the Broward County strategy to put up seawalls as our defense strategy, that would compromise the beaches downstream. If we use different sea level rise projections, we're not going to have compatibility in roadway infrastructure. If we're not thinking about our watershed in the same way, we share the same Biscayne aquifer. So how are we going to align that? Because we all have those same dependencies. It's the same resource, and we could go on and on. And we also knew that we had a lot of mutual dependencies as it relates to economics. Most of us, work in one community, live in another. Maybe we have medical facilities that we visit in another. We live in one. The kids go to school in another. We can't isolate ourselves, and I already expressed, this is kind of this continuum of development, and we had a lot of mutual interest in the successes of our neighboring communities because we aren't, just islands. Over the years, while we kind of started out with a high level and, we were trying to address these critical tools, critical needs, certainly the way that we have thought about the compact and issues that have evolved with time help to kind of refine the way that we think about ourselves, the way that we have gone through iterations as it relates to some of our work products. We recently completed our 3rd Regional Climate Action Plan, which I'll talk about in a moment. But what I did here was really pull from the introduction of our Regional Action Plan, which is available online. And the primary highlights, I think, that do a good job of characterizing why we work together as a compact today. So it's about accelerating our actions towards the shared vision of a low-carbon future. Again, I don't know if energy is part of the interests that exist here, but when we started out, we were really focused in large part on flood protection. I mean, we were seeing tidal flooding starting to happen quite severely in around the early 2000s. And no matter where you were in the conversation, you knew it was flooding. We knew that that had changed. And not everybody was talking about energy. But today, there's strong alignment in our region that not only is it an environmental and a societal imperative, but it's an economic imperative. There's so much that's going to be coming with establishing ourselves as a core for clean energy and attracting investment that's organized around clean energy, and there's so many companies that have goals associated with clean energy that it's going to be important that we're able to communicate that for so many reasons. So, as I said, we didn't start out there, but we ended up being able to speak more completely about the whole of climate as we moved through, the last nearly 15 years. Health was not a primary element in our first action plan either. I think when we started out, we really focused on the things where we had more expertise and areas because we didn't have external staffing or resources. So we were really focused on areas where we had greater competency, but we were criticized fairly early on about why isn't public health really called out in your action plan. We did some supplemental work soon after the action plan and then brought that into the next iteration. So again, it's been an iterative process, recognizing that we didn't have all the information or tools when we set out. And the process, prosperous, I think we started talking much more about economic resilience in the 5th year of our initiative. Economic resilience was not a focal area in our first action plan. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then clearly, the issues of equity have really grown over the years and a much stronger awareness of the importance of ensuring equitable futures and opportunities. And I do want to know that perhaps at one point in time it was more referenced in terms of like racial equity, but there's all areas of equity, and we might talk about new development and old development, or we might talk about inland areas of our county versus coastal, or maybe it's economic, equity and disadvantaged communities. But we're a diverse region, and equity means something different perhaps where you are in the region. And so I think that our approach to equity is one of recognizing all the distinctions that you have across complex demographics. Strengthening the adaptive capacity of climate resilience in our region's communities, institutions, and economy. The importance of institutional partners, I think, has really grown over the years as well. We undertook an economic resilience assessment. Some of the recommendations coming from that really emphasized the partnerships with institutions, particularly if we're talking about career development and pathways, and how do we work better with the institutions to be part of the solutions that we're trying to develop in our region. And then harmonizing regional action while respecting climate initiatives must be responsive to local conditions, priorities, and needs. We set and establish overarching frameworks, but there is no dictating how things get implemented. And harmonization it can be a challenge, and especially when we're looking at infrastructure with state agency partners. And so it's really about trying to assure that alignment, but the implementation itself will clearly have to take into account local circumstances. And so again, the regional effort isn't one supplanting what are clearly local knowledge and needs. And so there's a lot of flexibility in the way that we operate as a compact in terms of respecting those distinctions. So I just wanted to share a little bit about how we really work functionally. When our commissions took the compact concept, and it's actually just it's like a 5 or 6 page document, and it too is available on the website, the original document, Commitment to Work Together. They also agreed that we would assign personnel. We were all from different arenas. My background's in water resources. My colleague in Miami-Dade is a planner. The colleague down in Monroe County used to be a project manager with the Water Management District. Today our partner up in Palm Beach is an attorney. So it's whomever has that role within the organization, but we've all identified, and we've seen retirements and transitions in staff, but we have core 4 people who are county representatives. We're all staff, none of us are elected officials, who are responsible for implementing and executing on the compact. And then clearly we all have additional teams. Teams were very small at one point. Palm Beach County maybe only had 1 other staff person. Monroe didn't have any. Over the years, Miami-Dade's team has grown stronger. So as resources have shifted, we've also changed kind of the scale of who's participating in the conversation. But we have 4 primary individuals that are responsible for the decision making. We also, we meet monthly, formally. Today those meetings are, we have requirements, legislative requirements about in-person meetings, so we do have to manage that. We have partners who we identified very early on to be key to our efforts. The Nature Conservancy was providing a lot of local support, so they are an ad hoc participant. We have the Regional Planning Council, so not quite the MPO, but we do have our South Florida Regional Planning Council that's a member. We later entered into a partnership, not formal really, it's just a memorandum of understanding with the Florida Climate Institute. So these are our academic partners. In this case, we have learned down in California, they have an incredibly robust partnership. I forget what their local, it's like a COG, an organization of governments, but they were working very closely with the academics. They were able to bring in lots of resources and science-directed initiatives that had applied relevance in the community. And we just didn't have that. We couldn't access it. And so we really felt like we needed to do more to cultivate that partnership in our region. And there's a collaborative with universities. We said, you need to focus on the efforts here in Southeast Florida. So that kind of came out of that conversation. And then we have had, for the bulk of the years, the Institute of Sustainable Communities has served as our project manager. It would have been very, very challenging for the counties to have come together outside of a facilitator. There had been challenges in the past in terms of resource competition. Sometimes federal funds were coming down and it didn't there were sore feelings about how things got distributed, and maybe folks didn't seem to share the way we would have liked. So, from a political level, there was history there, but there was also a very strong commitment by leadership, both sides of the aisle, that this was important. But we did have initially a gentleman who had been working in the governor's office who had a strong policy background, and he was serving as a facilitator for some of our conversation, helped draft the compact document. He ended up going to the University of Oregon. We got some grant dollars and we were able to keep him on with us as a facilitator for some time. Later, he went to the Institute of Sustainable Communities. We continued to contract with him. He left, and we still continue to contract with a project manager there. So the point being that we do today have dollars, initially we didn't, that bring a project manager to support us administratively. So we have, some level of grant support, meeting support, arrangements, convening support. We have some administrative support that's coming from somewhere outside the counties, even though the counties do a lot of the work still. But I do think when you have a complaint, there's somebody who's kind of fielding the conversation and serving as this neutral party when tensions might come up, and helping to negotiate that, should that occur. And then over the years too, we've also developed different work groups for different topics. Some of these are permanent, some of them are more ephemeral. So we might have a summit and technical workshops. We've had a number of significant deliverables that have come from the compact, including our regional sea level rise projection, greenhouse gas emissions, a regional action plan, and many, many others. But and most of these have been iterated on 3 years, so they're 5-year planning documents, and they continue to get updated. Then they get adopted, and now they serve as the basis for the whole field of planning and infrastructure design and clean energy initiatives. By working together, we've been able to attract a multitude of partners, whether they're local government, agency, academic institutions, media partnerships. By working as a region, we also supported the first media collaboration that I think has ever been documented in the nation, and it was focused on climate, and it was born out of, look, we've been working at different scales in local government and business, and now we need to do it in media to aid with the communication efforts, and that's still in existence today. I mentioned that in the 5th year we brought in the private sector. It's not that we didn't want the private sector to engage initially, but I think that they weren't quite ready. And as we got into the 5th year and we came to them with a conversation of economic resilience, then they said, though, what took you so long? So they've been, though, incredible partners since that time. They brought forward money to support a business case for resilience. We knew we wanted to be able to talk more about what this meant in our community, but what's the message? So through this joint funding of the business case for resilience, we were able to demonstrate that each dollar spent on adaptation at a community-wide level has a 4-to-1 return on investment. Building level adaptation has a 2-to-1 return on investment. You need both. This is the way of avoided impacts. It's jobs, it's preservation of the tax base, it's insurance reductions, it's loss reductions, the whole gamut. And this was really important to then beginning to further underscore why we need to change our design standards for infrastructure, why we need to have an organized resilience infrastructure plan that's addressing community-wide needs, not just the redevelopment. We've, over the years, cultivated many different types of tools and products. This is not anywhere near exhaustive. Most of this is online, but we have a dedicated website for the region in addition to what any of us have at the county and local levels. Regional vulnerability assessments. I think you all have a sustainability or climate snapshot that's kind of like our climate change assessment tool. We share ordinances, resolutions. We go after grants together. We have a quarterly newsletter, the media coordination. Again, lots of ways that we communicate as a region. We continue to host our annual summits. We rotate the hosting responsibility from the counties north to south every year. So this year, Broward County just hosted for the 4th time our the Regional Climate Summit. We had about 800 attendees from our 300 in the first year. and we're able to offset almost all those costs through sponsorships and registration. We hold implementation workshops that focus on priority strategies in the regional action plan. We have a little over 100 strategies in the action plan. We usually identify 3 or 4 each year to really work with the cities, consultants, all of those who are involved in implementation on what does implementation look like, because you can't just put it on paper and expect that it happens on its own. We've created special forums for the business community, including roundtables, special workshops where we bring business leadership and our community leadership together each year. Business leaders meet with our county officials, not each year, every 2 years, to talk about economic resilience and what's happening, because the economic position of the counties affects finance rates, insurance, investment. Amazon, when they were looking for headquarters, we're talking about resilience. It's that type of conversation. How do we work better together to bring those infrastructure and risk reduction strategies to the forefront? Housing is a huge part of the conversation as well. We find opportunities to recommit, leadership changes. So every summit we try to have a deliverable. Every 5 years we have a new action plan. Each of those action plans comes back to the board. Always opportunities to re-engage. All of our cities have new officials. We have a climate pledge that we reach out to the municipalities seeking their endorsement. So it's a constant conversation that's being cultivated. Business leadership. We really emphasize joint policy. I mean, leadership like to focus on those deliverables, and there's so much more that we can do together when we're working together. So we've been able to bring the Army Corps to the table for initiatives that none of us could have advocated for alone. Funding. Again, we're supported by a team of staff who are working together in our respective offices, but we're talking to each other every day. Not a week goes by where we're not calling upon each other, vetting different issues, trying to advance work products, resolution comprehensive plans, looking at new data and tools. We've learned through the years a number of points. We spent a lot of time focusing on the structure of the compact and whether this would be something really formal or not. There were a number of reasons why we approached things the way that we did. Today, we do struggle sometimes with how to bring in funding. One partner has to manage the funding on behalf of the initiative. Contracting, we have certain challenges. So those might be things that you think about when you're functioning as a region. How will you address these things? How do you have to meet in person? What kind of just the logistics of getting together? Who should be involved? Too big of a circle, it's hard to get much done. Too secular, then folks are concerned that it seems exclusive. How do you provide for the support and staffing? We do a lot to augment the efforts in addition through local initiatives, so I just don't want to ignore the fact that you have to go back home and still do a lot of work outside of what happens regionally. And in Broward, we hold annual roundtables with leadership as one example, many, many other things though. And then finally, I would just say that when we all came together, we knew that we were distinct. And we didn't try to force everyone to operate in a certain mold. We knew that some communities had more resources than others. When we came to the table to baseline our initial data, not everybody had an inventory. And we had to come back and start at zero so that we could bring everybody up together, and that was okay. The counties that had more resources were going to carry the counties that didn't have as much, and that was okay. So I think we all learned to be really generous. Some of us have expertise in areas that others don't. Lend that. Why should we all have to have a transportation expert? Why should we all have to have an energy expert or water expert or a natural systems expert? If you've got one, that's great. Use that expertise to support the whole region and share the competency that you have. Maintain flexibility, understanding that adoption of things and process, it varies throughout the region. It might take one community 3 days and another 3 months. It's okay, everybody's got a different process. It's just the way that you work. We learned to serve as a convener, and even for partners outside of the state, it's really important to have a forum where people can come together, share, get excited. We all need that reanimation to carry the work forward. And again, I've talked about the importance of deliverables and really having something material that you know that you're regularly working for. So that's the end of the stage setting, and I look forward to any questions. I hope that it might help inform the way you all think about your needs and whether or not regional collaborations in South Florida or you know, offer some models that would be helpful here. Thank you.
Okay, now we are going to move on to the fireside chat aspect of the program. I'm going to go ahead and invite Morgan Nicholson, the Director of Office of Sustainability from the City of Indianapolis, to come up. Morgan is an advocate of climate justice and works to increase awareness on the interconnectedness of climate change as it intersects with other important issues of today. In her role as the Director of the Office of Sustainability, she oversees the implementation of the city's first Sustainability and Resilience Action Plan, Thrive Indianapolis. Go ahead and invite Annie Dixon, the Indianapolis MPO Project Manager for the Resiliency Snapshot. Annie is a senior planner with us, managing several regional projects, including not only the Snapshot, but the Central Indiana Transit Plan Update. An Evansville, Indiana native, I kind of forget that from time to time, and a graduate of DePaul, and a former golfer athlete, I added that in. Annie aspires to use urban and transit planning to mitigate the negative effects of climate change while centering equity. So I'm going to pass this to you.
Thank you, Anna. Just wanted to once again thank Dr. Jurado for joining us and for the presentation. Wanted to open it up for questions from the audience. I have many questions for you, but I don't want to hog our public space for dialogue. So wanted to open up to the floor if anyone has questions. What student athletes coming out right now?
Hi, thank you. It was really interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about how the multiple layers of regional organizations work together in your region?
Sure. So the regional, for us, the Regional Planning Council has an area that includes Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe. And the Regional Planning Council has elected officials, serving on the board. They complete the regional economic what's that report? The regional
Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy.
Right. They are responsible for that particular report. The Treasure Coast has a different reach and includes Palm Beach. So we actually have two regional planning councils that share our 4-county area. And each of our counties has its own MPO. So Broward has an MPO, Miami-Dade has an MPO, and Palm Beach has an MPO. Monroe County does not. Broward County's MPO used to be part of county government. It is not any longer. The Regional Planning Council typically weighs in historically on lots of projects of regional impact. Over the years, though, their authority's been diminished, and I think that they've had a harder time exerting influences, but nonetheless, they provide valuable review of projects of large scales and hurricane preparedness, things like that. Widely respected with our business community, valued immensely by our business community, and I think a very strong partner in thinking about housing issues as well. And they're constantly looking at things across our lower 3 counties and working very closely with the Treasure Coast that also has an exceptional reputation. And so because we are this large regional planning area, there isn't another entity that looks at housing and transportation systems quite like that. We do have a regional transportation office for the state. All the state dollars are directed through the MPOs. The MPOs have tried to integrate more in the way of resilience. I don't think it's being executed the way that it quite needs to. The MPOs tend to work more closely with the cities than with the county. There's much stronger municipal representation on the MPOs than the county, and that's probably a bit of a sore spot, especially because it used to be part of the county, so you can imagine. But there's a lot of cooperation. Everybody knows each other. The ports work with each other, the airports work with each other, the MPOs respect each other. The regional planning councils have been immensely effective in advancing some of the policy issues that the compact has raised because they've got such strong legislative support. When you look at all those elected officials who are all of our counties help fund the regional planning councils, so we all have a stake in their success, and when they come together on reef issues or tax issues, and there have been other, there's a lot of political influence, and so we really try to capitalize on the influence that different entities have. They're all valuable in different ways. In our case, the Regional Planning Council is much more engaged in the compact than the MPO for a variety of reasons, but in other areas, the MPOs are very, lead partners. In other areas of our state, the regional planning councils in all areas of our state, we were the first compact and shared the model, and now there's like 6 compacts in our region. All of the others, the MPO is the lead entity. We are the only one in which that's not the case. And at that time, our regional planning council didn't think climate change was very important. And so they weren't, they were brought in later as a complementary partner, but not a lead partner. Does that answer your question?
Additional questions from the audience?
I was just curious, how did you choose the 4 counties, or did they choose themselves? Why not 5? Why not 6 counties? And then the other question, since you've been so successful, has there been discussion since climate change is a global issue of increasing the size of, again, possibly adding more stakeholders geographically?
So the initial 4 counties came together because all 4 of our counties were in Washington, D.C. at that time in that hallway having that conversation and doing the work. Around the same time, there was another initiative that the Regional Planning Council was heading called 750, and that was an EPA Sustainable Communities grant, if y'all remember that. And in that situation, 7 counties were part of that effort, but the 3 to the north were very conservative, except for 1. And they backed out of the 750 initiative at one point in time, and that's when there was a lot of accusations of Agenda 21, if you remember, maybe you don't know about, but there were, there was that group, and it was very present in the northern part, and so there wasn't the same political will. And it's hard enough to keep up with everything that we need. You need to have all partners on board. I mean, you can't just be carrying people who aren't going to come along. And there was some interest in the west coast of Florida coming into the compact, but they didn't share enough in the way of the same geographic ties. The coast is different. They're on the other side of the Everglades. It's a different water source. I mean, there were a lot of things that they were geographically separated. We're separated by 2-hour, for us, 2-hour drive time across the Everglades is significant. And even though they've been trying to pull together a compact there for now, I would say about 5 years, they've still only got 1 mayor, the mayor of Naples, that's really interested. They can't bring the other leadership along. It's just a municipal mayor, not, the county isn't engaged. The academics have really tried. That leadership has come from the academic community. So it's really needed. You need to have, and it can't just be a single county official, because you can usually find one, but it's just the board going to get behind that. And our boards have always unanimously adopted everything. Honestly, it's been unanimous. And one of the notes I wanted to make is that our effort is consensus driven. And if we can't get to consensus on something, it doesn't advance. There's no, there's never any 3-1 vote among the staff. We all do vote, but if it's not consensus, it doesn't move forward. And I would like to say that at one point in time when the initial compact was coming forward, there was some lobbying by our energy utility about how clean energy was referenced, and they wanted nuclear energy to be listed as clean energy in this initial document. And my commissioner felt very strongly that it wasn't, but she said, you know what, I'm not going to die on a sword for one single word. For a single word to have the whole thing erupt over. So people have made concessions along the way, but it requires consensus, and you have to have political will to get there. You have to be determined that that's important. And so that's kind of why we've been at the 4-county level for the years that we have. However, we collaborate extensively with Martin County that is very inclined on so many of the issues, and we provide support beyond the county, but they're not part of the compact, and they don't attend the monthly meetings and all that.
I have two questions. I'll just do them really quickly. One is, how are you dealing with your state legislature and the political winds that probably do shape some of your advocacy work? And then secondly, with federal funding, I want to know what both of you are thinking about in terms of the upcoming opportunities under the Inflation Reduction Act. What are you working on? What are you looking at? How do you see that being implemented in the coming year and a half or so?
Well, I'll start with the first question, and maybe you'd like to lead on the second one. So our state, when we were coming together as a compact, that was at a time of transition. There wasn't much activity. Clearly, everyone's heard the statements about not being able to say climate change, whether it's true or not. It may be. Our elected officials, whether they were Republican or Democrat, they always said nobody cares what party you are when things are flooding, they just want you to pick up the phone. And so their response is that actions local, we were going to be responsive and independent of what the state was doing. We do have, and I think you're a strong home rule state, we are very much strong home rule, but there's always legislative efforts to diminish that. We rely heavily on our land use authority and environmental authorities and delegated authorities under a variety of programs on implementation. Finally, our state is, and I'll acknowledge that I think that the Flood Coalition has been a strong influence in the state's ability to talk more about flood risk and planning for sea level rise, and that has allowed advancements legislatively. Our state is not talking about mitigation activities at all. We have very weak energy policy. We have no energy conservation goals, no renewable energy goals, and it's just not part of the conversation. So everything that happens in that arena happens locally, and it happens through the counties. And then did you want to start with the foundation?
Federal funding is certainly top of mind for many of us. I would say the CPRG, Climate Pollution Reduction Fund, is certainly pertinent to this conversation as well. And efforts coming out of us as an MSA applying for that grant, I'm really hopeful that it could help facilitate some of this regional planning effort. I think that's certainly the EPA's goal, right? From seeing how they're structuring it, and it's critical that we have some of these solid implementation efforts in that plan, right, so that we can seek the $4 billion worth of funding. Andy, feel free to add in here, the IMPO is taking a significant facilitation role in this.
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to acknowledge the climate pollution reduction grant opportunity as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Indianapolis IMPO is partnering with multiple municipalities as well as the Central Indiana Regional Development Authority or Central Indiana RDA. So the two of us are working together. The IMPO role will be included in kind of some data collection as well as facilitating a lot of public engagement. So we're really looking forward to the partnership and to the development of the deliverables as it'll be kind of this region, like this regional level greenhouse gas inventory, and we want it to be very heavily stakeholder driven and public driven. So we're really looking forward to that. Also wanted to note as well, the state of Indiana is pursuing a climate pollution reduction grant as well. The Indiana Department of Environmental Management will be conducting a statewide plan. So of course we will want this regional MSA plan to coordinate as well to kind of maximize the coordination and the opportunity for the municipalities in this region to go after that federal funding.
On that note, do you have any advice for us as a single entity or, towards the larger regional entity of lessons learned along the way in taking that regional planning approach?
Well, as it relates to the funding, so we are organized as an MSA and pursuing funds in that regard. There's also a lot of electric vehicle charging infrastructure funding currently available. BRIC through FEMA, major funding source, more funds being made available there. We're looking to our DOT and trying to influence the DOT to better prioritize resilience as part of projects, because we're not pleased necessarily with the selection of, and it's not necessarily just the DOT, but we need to do more to influence the projects that we know to be a priority. What I would say about the guidance on the regional funding, we've been in situations before where there was a funding opportunity and any of us could have applied, maybe more than one entity was interested, and we actually had numerous examples where we looked at our landscape of partners and decided who was best equipped to apply for the funding if we felt like the competition was so tight that we couldn't reasonably expect successful applications. So we do collaborate, and we are collaborating, like on this particular effort that we acknowledged. A lot of the infrastructure funding that we need probably doesn't require a regional application right now. If it were something that were specific to an airport or port, but when we're able to talk about assets of regional significance, of course, that then increases the scoring for projects. And what we're, I think, trying to do in our efforts is underscore that all of this regional planning is taking place. We're all utilizing the same tools. Everything's harmonized, and we have a plan that's consistent with the regional work that's been advanced for 15 years, and we're prepared to implement it, and this is what it looks like. So I think it's about ensuring that we can reinforce each other in the conversation and with our projects and show alignment that demonstrates, because if you just have one project or haphazard projects, you don't know how they work together. But if you have alignment, you can demonstrate what the combined benefit of those projects are, because they're designed with the same assumptions, and you ideally are able to model the collective performance. And so we're actually doing that now with a county-wide infrastructure plan, trying to ensure that every project that moves forward is reinforced by these others because otherwise, how do you value that? I mean, you can't adequately account for it when you look at whether it's the economic return on investment or the risk mitigation. Outside entities need to be able to value those projects in economic terms, and if you haven't set yourself up with the right tools to show how that combined investment works, I don't think you can deliver as compelling an argument as needed to attract funding and to demonstrate that you've got a stable economic environment that's worth investing in.
We had a question submitted with a registration, thank you, wherever you are out there in the audience. How has COVID impacted your action plans?
Well, Now, I don't know that we would say specifically that we have new actions that are in direct response, but I think that it has informed the way we think about opportunities and what your community can look like. And I'll give you an example, and I don't know if it's a fair one, but when people were no longer working and everybody was at home, or a lot of people were at home, we continue to work at the office, but the commute was great. So you think about all the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that come, and that you can operate in an alternative mode that can support a better quality of life, reduce the expense of vehicles, gasoline, commute time, increase productivity. And so you've got that as a demonstration mechanism, whether it's full-time, part-time, or something. The other was the importance, I think, of taking back streets and taking back a community. And you think about complete streets and what does that look like and what does it do for community livability. It gives you a vision of how implementation will really work and function. And all of a sudden, everybody was out, walking the dogs, bicycle. People don't do that in South Florida. It's dangerous, But, and then also thinking about new ways for traffic patterns. And so I think it revealed that. It revealed and reinforced the importance of different investments in equity, in terms of our resilience plan is not the Rockefeller plan. The 100 resilient cities is far broader in scope than what our resilience plan is. So we don't take into account all aspects of education and all aspects of security and things like that. But within the strategies, it is those emphasizing the issues of equity, because we saw what inequity looked like also in COVID, and really trying to be thoughtful about how can we respond to some of those exposures. I don't know if that's a very complete response or it's responsive to whomever asks the question, but. And I will say that as soon as that happened and our administrators were all together thinking about how to respond, they immediately referenced the compact and how we have a history of working together, and we would work together through COVID like we've been working on climate. I mean, so immediately our administrators pulled on that in their top points.
That's great.
Yeah, follow up to that equity piece. Have you been able to create a shared understanding of what equity means and how you're integrating it across the compact?
I would say that there's probably not complete alignment on where that falls because of the differences in our community, what certain communities would say is feasible versus so there's a strong appreciation of the need for affordable housing, no matter where you are. But Monroe County doesn't look like an agricultural community, and you can't use language, as many times people want to use language as the defining factors, like some of the richest people in South Florida speak, or from somewhere else. And so I think we appreciate that you need to account for all individuals in your community. And you need to provide opportunities for all individuals in your community. And you can't expect or accept, is the better, disparate outcomes. And we need to be sensitive to those who are already hurting will hurt worse without stronger intervention. So for us, it's about the approach, not necessarily the target. And I think that individuals, that equity issues will be, locally. In Miami-Dade County, you have a much stronger, in my opinion, concern about gentrification, because you've had a lot of development along railroad tracks that are at a higher elevation where lower income individuals lived, and now it's the focus for redevelopment. I don't know that you would see that exact same pattern in Broward County. So there's going to be different sensitivities to different squeezes and pressures. And what happens with insurance and flooding and infrastructure investment, I think I described what the objective is, but there's many ways in which that gets addressed at local levels, and there's local needs and pressures and responses they look different from community to community.
It makes me think a lot about the resiliency conversation and how it looks so different for different communities, different people.
And I'll let you ask the next question.
Wanted to open up if there were any other questions from the audience, so we have a list, but. You've done such a great job answering so many of these that we have prepped ahead of time, but just wanted to kind of bring you at this regional level that we are at in Central Indiana. The compact has existed for 15 years, as you said, and what we're seeing here is we have some municipalities that have done some introductory greenhouse gas inventories. Marion County and City of Indianapolis have a very robust greenhouse gas inventory and plan, and they're reporting on those. Actually, like describe the Thrive plan. And some counties haven't done county level ones, or some municipalities haven't done kind of robust greenhouse gas inventories. For Central Indiana, as we start climate planning at the regional level, who are your kind of early champions, and what were kind of some key strategies to success as you were starting kind of the regional compact and the regional conversation?
Well, clearly you had the elected leadership, but we think a lot of the coming along, the reach out to staff happened through those that were interestingly involved in the legislative process because they had been collaborating like in Tallahassee for some time. Those early relationships were really important in terms of identifying the right point person within each of the local governments to say, how do we reach out and how do we bring this together. When we were working with the data disparities, I already shared that we kind of had to take a step back, acknowledge that some of the work would be duplicative or redundant, but even if we'd done the work before, it wasn't aligned. And so, it was about establishing commonality in the data sets. Subsequent to the regional work, many of the counties then did go back and provide targeted support to the municipalities. We don't have it within and I should say this, we don't have within the compact the capacity to be the planner for all 109 cities. Nor do we want that. There was a question in the organizational process about whether or not we would try to fund, and maybe we should talk about funding, but fund the compact through municipal membership in the compact. It's like, well, what is that? I don't mean to be disparaging, but what is that going to mean? Like, what will our responsibilities now be to 109 cities? We can barely keep up with the 31 cities that we have in Broward County. I can't do the work at that level, and I don't want to have to manage all those. So we did not want to be that. But we did support all of our cities in the coastal. We have 12 coastal cities and conducting early vulnerability assessments for them based upon the regional models. We took the regional model, we said, look, we put your assets in there, we've got a good GIS system, and we did that for our coastal cities, and the other counties did the same thing. They used their internal teams once we developed the regional baseline. On the greenhouse gas emissions inventories, we brought in team members from our different air programs, and they all support the compact with the data sets and the data compilation. It isn't the compact, ICLEI, we work with ICLEI on this, but ICLEI isn't doing that work on its own. We all have to bring resources to the table, and our county people, they've been working on community-wide inventories for some time, and those other counties who might not have been doing that work, well, they can talk to the county that has and know, well, where do you get the data, and how do you get the data, and how do you make the data request? Or some of the data requests can be organized for all 4 counties, but to the extent that they can't, then they're not. So we've been able to use the model for the data sets to make sure that we're all asking for data in the same format, which is a huge issue too. If you don't know how to make the ask, you'll get it and you'll have to go through the entire exercise all over again. Also on, I'll share right now that we've been working on a net zero strategy for Broward County. We're only in the RFP, we're not very far along at all. But you know, we know that most of the implementation that happens in our communities is at the city level. Just as if you're at state, it's at the local level. So it isn't good enough to have the regional and stop there. It has to be packaged incrementally in ways that can be useful for direct implementation. We have a very small unincorporated area. We have a population of nearly 2 million, but our unincorporated area is only 10,000. So most of this is with the city, so how can we be helpful? With the net zero strategy, we're setting that up so that a city can say, I look like this, you know, I've got a wastewater treatment plant, a water treatment plant, I've got, you know, a landfill, I've got this many employees, and you know, we've got this much grease, whatever. And they can get a general net zero plan given the way that they look, because they're small, medium, large. It's like, if you do, this is what we're vying for. If you do these 10 things, you can get almost all the way to net zero. But for other cities who want their own net zero strategy, we reached out and said, look, we've got a regional RFP. Do you want us to include in there something for your city that is your own net zero strategy? And several said yes, so we're looking for an extra $100,000 from each one of them to augment our own budget. And then when we negotiate, they'll get their net zero strategy, and we can save everybody the procurement headache. So finding ways, and that's been part of our process as well, is sharing on procurement, trying to, in the divvying up of responsibilities, we try to find the partner who has the easiest procurement, and oftentimes it's Broward County, but you know, sometimes we're sharing attorneys and their expertise so they can help guide another attorney on something else. I mean, it's really, again, trying to find how do you share resources, how do you deliver resources, how do you find templates that work to accelerate things, and really just try to move more quickly as a region than if you were trying to reinvent everything every time at each jurisdictional level.
We've got time for one more, Morgan.
Well, it's like you read my mind. One of my questions was, how are we going to balance the need for a community-driven action plan at the local level? You know, Broward Indianapolis had strong stakeholder engagement. It's very representative of what our community wanted, but then roll up into this common framework that a regional plan represents, right? And so I think you touched on that a little bit, but if you do have any examples of community engagement and what that process looks like to inform the plan?
Well, one, I would guess that they're going to look very similar, because if a partner has already moved so far ahead and is very progressive, ideally the regional plan is taking advantage of a lot of that work, and next time you go through an iteration, you'll just tick yourself a little bit further. But we, through our regional climate action plan that we develop every 5 years, the development process is usually about a year in duration. The way that we approach that, and I'm just giving our example, is that we have a call for participants. Some of them come from our local governments and our teams, and we identify across our organizations, you know, who are in our communities, who are likely SMEs, subject matter experts. But we also put a call out community-wide saying, we're getting ready to do this. Are you somebody of interest who'd like to participate in this process? So then we hold convenings on each of our focal areas. We develop those recommendations. We've put it out for public review, public comment. And in the past, we've had regional in-person meetings, but it is too hard, frankly. It's too large of a geographic area. People don't want to drive all over the place. We don't necessarily want them to drive. So the virtual, which is, of course, what we learned through COVID as well, is a really great way to do regional engagement. We were able to update our action plan through an entirely virtual process, and I think that it worked quite well. I did want to say about the, is that good? And on the funding level, funding question, I did want to share, and I think something that was important was that initially we didn't have resources. We really focused on where can we communicate successes And some of that was in being able to bring in grant dollars, and I think being able to celebrate successes, you know, successful completion, adoption, endorsement of regional sea level rise projections, whatever it is. The elected officials like those gains. Why would you not continue to support great gains? And so we spent a lot of time documenting the value of working regionally and the successful outcomes, and we would have like a one-page publication that would highlight how wonderful we are, and you'd remind everyone every year how wonderful we are. And we were able to get nearly $1 million in Kresge funding in our early years that provided that administrative support for a series of years, and then they began to taper that off because their goal was to operationalize the compact. And as they were tapering off their funding, we started putting forward funding requests, first $50,000 a year, then $75,000, and today we all budget, to be transparent, $100,000 a year, all 4 of our counties, even though we're different sized counties. All counties agreed, and you could work up a different formula, but all of our counties put forth $100,000 a year, and that $400,000 provides the staff support and the overhead and all of that to support the compact. But you've got huge gains for $100,000 a year, and
I wanted to say, I would sit here until midnight and ask you more questions, but I have a feeling you all might have some other commitments later in the evening. A couple things before I let you go. This is the first event in the 2023 IMPO Speaker Series. We have more in the coming months. We will have one on housing. We will have one on active transportation, including the biking and walking. We will have one on safety, among others. So please join us. This event will be concluding now. We do have networking and refreshments available in the hallway, and please give our speakers another round of applause for bringing their expertise.